I never thought a leaking tap on a yacht would reveal the truth about who I really am in my family's eyes. You see, sometimes it isn't the big battles that uncover the truth. It's the smallest moments, the ones no one expects. That day, we were all gathered on the yacht. My children laughed, their spouses showing off, wine glasses clinking in the sun. They thought the yacht was theirs to enjoy, theirs to boast about. To them, as I was just there, quiet, simple, unimportant. When I noticed the tap dripping, I did what I've done my whole life. I rolled up my sleeves and fixed it. To me, it was nothing. But to my son-in-law, it was everything. He sneered, his voice cutting through the air. Plumbers have no place here. The laughter that followed stung more than I'll ever admit. They saw me as less. A woman who belonged behind a sink, not standing on the deck of luxury. But what they didn't know, what not one of them imagined, was that the yacht they stood upon, the yacht they mocked me on, was mine. And when the moment came, I looked him in the eyes and told him the truth that silenced them all. When I stepped onto the dock that morning, the sun was just beginning to spill across the water, painting the surface in shades of gold and silver. The sea was calm, the gulls wheeled overhead, and the yacht, my yacht, stood proudly in front of me. To anyone else, it was simply a vessel of luxury. Polished white paint, gleaming chrome railings, glass windows that caught the light like mirrors. But to me, it was something more. It was a memory, a sacrifice, and a secret I had kept close to my heart for years. I walked slowly, letting the sound of the water lapping against the dock guide me forward. My children were already there, their voices carrying across the morning air like bells, bright, loud, careless. My daughter-in-law's laughter was sharp and high, almost rehearsed, as though she wanted the entire marina to know how delighted she was to be boarding a yacht. My son's voice boomed, a little too loud, a little too eager, as he recounted to one of his friends how fortunate they were to have such an opportunity. I heard every word, though I pretended I didn't. When I reached the deck, I was greeted with a flurry of movement. My grandchildren rushed past me, eyes wide with wonder as they explored the ship. "Look at this! Look at that!" they shouted, pointing to the polished brass and the wide-open deck chairs. They ran barefoot across the wooden floors, their laughter bouncing from one end of the yacht to the other. It should have been a beautiful moment. It should have filled me with joy. And in some quiet way, it did. But beneath that joy was something else. An ache, an old ache, the kind a mother feels when she knows she is being overlooked, yet chooses not to speak. I smiled anyway, setting my purse down quietly near a chair. My son didn't look at me when I arrived. He was too busy taking a photograph of his wife leaning against the railing. Her sunglasses perched just so, her lips curled in a smile she probably practiced in the mirror. She adjusted her dress, tugged it tighter against her waist, and tilted her chin toward the sun as though she were posing for a magazine. He snapped photo after photo, each one followed by another burst of her laughter, each one meant to be shared online with captions about luxury weekends and living the dream. My daughter, too, was caught up in the moment. She slipped off her sandals and stretched her legs across a cushioned chair, pulling out her phone immediately to film a video. She swept the camera across the deck, narrating as though she were a television host. "Here we are, guys, out on the water, about to set sail on this gorgeous yacht. Can you believe it?" Her friends would see it within minutes, her feed lighting up with comments of envy and admiration. I stood there quietly, watching them all, my heart full of complicated emotions. Pride because they were mine, sadness because they didn't see me, and patience because I had learned long ago that silence often reveals more than words ever could. As I watched, I noticed small things. The latch on one of the windows wasn't closing properly. The deck chair's leg wobbled when my granddaughter climbed onto it. A tap near the sink inside gave a faint drip, 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 barely noticeable above the chatter of voices. These were things no one else paid attention to, but I did. Out of habit, I reached for the latch and secured it. I steadied the chair so it wouldn't wobble when someone sat down again. Later, when I stepped inside the cabin, I twisted the tap just enough to stop the dripping. It wasn't work to me. It was instinct. Years of raising a family, years of keeping a home together with 2 hands and very little else, had taught me to notice the small things. The things that break when no one's looking. The things that need fixing but go unspoken. And so, without fanfare, without being asked, I fixed them. Not because anyone would thank me, because I knew they wouldn't, but because it's who I am. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my son-in-law watching me. He leaned against the railing, one hand shoved deep into his pocket, the other holding a glass of champagne he hadn't paid for. His sunglasses hid his eyes, but his smirk said enough. He tilted his head toward his wife and whispered something. She laughed, not loudly this time, but with a kind of sharpness that made my skin prickle. I didn't need to hear the words to know what he said. I've lived long enough to recognize mockery when I see it. He was always like that, subtle in his arrogance, careful with his insults, never direct enough to be called out, but always cruel enough to make sure I felt them. He wore his pride like a badge, always reminding me, in little ways, that he came from better stock. His suits were pressed sharper, his shoes shined brighter, his voice smoother, more polished. He looked at me like I was a relic of a world he thought was beneath him, but I stayed silent. That day wasn't about me, at least not in their eyes. It was about them, about the way they wanted to be seen. And so I let them laugh. I let them preen. I let them snap their photos and sip their drinks as though the world belonged to them. I kept to the edges of the deck, hands folded neatly, eyes wandering from the horizon back to the little things that needed attention. At one point, my grandson tugged at my sleeve, his small voice filled with excitement. "Grandma, look at this room. It's so big." He pulled me inside, down into the cabin, showing me the soft leather seats and the polished wood. I smiled and nodded, letting him bask in the wonder of it all. Children see things differently. They see magic where adults see status. For him, the yacht wasn't about wealth or image. It was about adventure. And in that moment, I was grateful for his innocence. When I returned to the deck, my son-in-law's laughter followed me again. He had a way of making even a chuckle feel like an insult, as though the very air bent in his favor. He raised his glass to me mockingly, muttered something under his breath, and then turned his back. My daughter leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder, not noticing, or perhaps not caring, about the tension between us. I said nothing. I simply adjusted the chair cushion, wiped a small mark from the railing with the edge of my sleeve, and carried on as though I hadn't noticed. Because that is what mothers do, isn't it? We keep the peace, we smooth over the rough edges, we patch the cracks no one else sees. And all the while, I thought to myself, one day the truth will come out. One day they'll see me not as the woman who fixes their messes, but as the woman who made this all possible. But not yet. Not today. Today I would let them have their moment, let them play their games, let them live in their little fantasy. Because patience is its own kind of power. The sea breeze swept across the deck, carrying with it the faint scent of salt and sun. The yacht rocked gently as the engines roared to life, and everyone cheered as though they had been waiting their whole lives for this very moment. Glasses clinked, laughter echoed, and cameras flashed. They thought they were stepping into a dream. And perhaps in some ways they were, but me? I stood quietly in the corner, hands resting on the polished wood, heart steady, eyes calm. I knew something they didn't. I carried a truth they could not imagine. And as the yacht pulled away from the dock, cutting across the shining waters, I held that secret close, watching them, waiting, knowing that every laugh, every arrogant word, every careless gesture would one day be met with silence. Silence and truth. The sun was high above us now, its light spilling across the deck in golden sheets, warming the polished wood beneath my feet. The children's laughter had softened into playful chatter, their excitement now steady as the yacht cut through the water. The air was filled with the sound of waves brushing against the hull and the occasional cry of a distant gull. For a moment, everything seemed calm, almost peaceful. And then, the tap began to drip again. It was faint, a steady plink, plink, plink from the small sink tucked near the side deck. No one else noticed it. They were too busy posing for photographs, sipping champagne, and laughing at jokes that weren't really funny. But I heard it. My ears have always been tuned to the sounds of things breaking, of things wearing down, of things that need fixing before they collapse. Without a word, I reached for the handle and twisted it gently, adjusting the angle until the dripping slowed. It wasn't a big job. It wasn't something that required tools or effort. It was just instinct. I've fixed taps 100 times before in houses far less glamorous than this one. And so I did what came naturally. But in that moment, I felt his eyes on me. My son-in-law. He leaned lazily against the railing, glass of champagne still in his hand, sunglasses perched on his nose like a shield from the world. His lips curled into that familiar smirk, the one that never reached his eyes, the one that told me he thought himself better than me. He watched me as though I were a curiosity, something to mock, something beneath him. And then he said it, clear enough for everyone to hear. "Plumbers have no place here." The words sliced through the air sharper than any blade. My hand froze on the tap, the sound of the water dripping suddenly louder, heavier, as though it echoed inside my chest. My breath caught, though I did not let it show. Slowly, I straightened, wiping my hand on the side of my dress, pretending not to care. But inside, I felt the weight of his mockery. For a moment, silence followed, and then came the laughter. Not just his. No. My daughter laughed too, leaning into his arm, her voice a little too bright, a little too eager. My son chuckled awkwardly, as though agreeing would keep the peace. Even my daughter-in-law, perched in her chair with her sunglasses tilted just so, let out a sharp little giggle. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. Enough to tell me they weren't laughing with me. They were laughing at me. I stood there quietly, letting their voices wash over me like a cold tide. Every chuckle, every smirk, every sideways glance. It all pressed down on me, heavy and cruel. I wanted to speak. Oh, I wanted to. 1,000 words burned on the tip of my tongue. I wanted to remind them of the years I spent working with my hands, the nights I stayed awake fixing leaks and patching roofs so they could sleep safely in their beds. I wanted to tell them that there was dignity in labor, that a mother's worth is not measured in silk dresses or expensive vacations. But I said nothing, because sometimes silence speaks louder than words. I kept my face calm, my eyes steady, my posture unshaken. I did not give him the satisfaction of seeing me wounded. Instead, I looked past him, past all of them toward the horizon where the sea met the sky. The line was steady, unbroken, eternal. And in that stillness, I found my strength. He laughed again, louder this time, raising his glass as though to toast his own insult. "Imagine," he said, voice dripping with mockery, "coming on a yacht only to fix the plumbing. Some people just don't know their place." The others chuckled again, their laughter weaker now, less certain. But still, they laughed. Still, they joined him. I lowered my gaze to the deck, tracing the grain of the wood with my eyes. My hands itched with the memory of every callus, every blister I had earned over the years. They thought plumber was an insult. To me, it was survival. It was sacrifice. It was the life I had lived so that they could stand here now, sipping drinks and posing for cameras. I wanted to ask them, did they forget? Did they forget who cooked their meals when money was tight, Who mended their clothes when they tore? Who worked late into the night fixing what broke so they could wake up to a home that still stood? Did they forget that every comfort they enjoyed now was built, in part, on my back? But I didn't ask. I didn't need to, because the truth has a way of waiting. So I let them laugh. I let them think they had won. I let my son-in-law bask in his arrogance, his smugness dripping from every word. He thought he had diminished me, reduced me to a role beneath his notice. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that every insult, every slight, every careless laugh was being recorded in my memory, stored away like kindling, waiting for a spark. I stood there quietly, observing, watching how my daughter leaned into him, how her laughter was not entirely her own but borrowed from his pride, watching how my son shifted uneasily, his smile not quite genuine, torn between loyalty to his mother and fear of his brother-in-law's sharp tongue, watching how my daughter-in-law's eyes flicked toward me, curious and cold, like someone watching a performance from the safety of the audience. They thought I didn't notice, but I notice everything. I adjusted the tap one last time, the dripping silenced, and then I straightened with dignity. My hands rested calmly at my sides, though my heart beat hard in my chest. I caught my grandson's eyes for a fleeting moment. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't joined in. Instead, he looked at me with confusion, as though he didn't understand why the adults were mocking. His small brows furrowed, his lips pressed into a thin line. In that moment, I felt seen. If only by him. But the others? No. To them, I was invisible. Or worse, I was a joke. The laughter slowly faded, replaced once again by chatter about the view, about the next destination, about which photo would look best online. They moved on, as though their cruelty was just another casual moment in the day. For them, it was nothing. For me, it was everything. I walked to the far side of the deck, letting the wind brush across my face, cooling the heat that had risen in my cheeks. I stood tall, shoulders squared, and breathed deeply of the salt air. They thought they had broken me. They thought their words had power. But they didn't understand. They didn't understand that I've been disrespected before, underestimated before, mocked before. And each time I've risen above it. Quietly, patiently, with the strength they could never see. So I remained calm. I hid my feelings, I observed, because while they laughed, I was listening. While they mocked, I was remembering. And while they believed I didn't belong, I knew, deep in my bones, that this place, this yacht, this moment, was mine. And nothing they said could change that. The laughter still rang faintly in my ears, long after it had died away on the deck. I stood apart from them, leaning on the cool railing, my eyes fixed on the horizon. Outwardly, I was still. My posture steady, my face unreadable. To them, it probably looked as though I hadn't heard, or perhaps that I was too simple to understand the sting of their words. But inside, oh, inside, I felt every syllable, every mocking tone, every chuckle that had followed. And yet, I did not answer. I have lived my whole life in silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from having nothing to say, but the kind of silence born of knowing when to hold back. I was underestimated as a girl, when people said I wasn't clever enough for school. I was underestimated as a young wife, when I was told my only role was to keep a clean house and a warm dinner on the table. And later as a mother, when even my own children assumed my strength was infinite, but my voice insignificant. So I learned. I learned to swallow words when they wouldn't change a thing. I learned to bow my head when arguing would only bring more pain. I learned that silence is not weakness. It is endurance. It is patience. It is a weapon sharper than any insult, because silence forces others to reveal themselves while you remain hidden. That day on the yacht, my silence was my shield. They thought they had won because I didn't fight back. They thought their laughter had buried me. But what they didn't understand was that I wasn't retreating. I was waiting. I leaned against the railing, my hands clasped in front of me, and let the memories wash over me. Memories of every sacrifice I had made, sacrifices none of them remembered anymore. I remembered the years when money was tight, so tight that every dollar stretched thinner than paper. When the children wanted new shoes for school, I patched the old ones until the seams could hold no more. When they wanted birthday parties, I baked cakes from scratch, decorating them with trembling hands late at night after working 2 shifts in one day. They never knew that sometimes I went to bed hungry, just so they could eat seconds at dinner. I remembered the winters when the furnace broke down. My son was just a boy then, shivering beneath blankets, his nose red from the cold. I stayed up all night, fixing that furnace with tools I barely knew how to use, praying it would hold together until morning. And it did. He never knew what it cost me. My cracked hands, my aching back, the tears I wiped away in the dark when no one was watching. I remembered the years after their father passed, how I shouldered the weight of 2 parents, doing the work of both mother and father, though I was only one weary woman. I carried that grief in silence, never letting them see the nights I cried alone at the kitchen table. Bills spread out in front of me, wondering how on earth I would manage. But somehow, I always did. I kept a roof over their heads. I kept food on their plates. I kept love in their lives, even when my own heart was breaking. And now they laughed at me, my son-in-law with his smug little smirk, my daughter leaning into him, borrowing his arrogance like a shawl, my other children chuckling nervously, too afraid to defend me. They thought they knew who I was. They thought I was just the quiet mother, the fixer of taps, the patcher of chairs, the background figure in their glamorous lives. But they didn't know. They didn't know that the silence they mistook for weakness was the very thing that had built their lives. That while they slept soundly in warm beds, I was awake, mending, working, sacrificing. They didn't know that their luxury, their ease, their laughter on that yacht was paid for by years of my struggle. They didn't know that the ground beneath their feet had been laid stone by my hands. I clenched the railing tighter, the wood cool against my skin. The sea stretched endlessly before me, calm but powerful, vast but steady. Just like me. They only saw the surface, smooth and quiet. They never understood the depths. And so I stayed quiet. Because I knew something they didn't. I knew their laughter would not last long. Every chuckle, every insult, every dismissive glance. It was fuel. Fuel for the fire I kept carefully hidden. They thought they had silenced me, but I was simply waiting for the moment when silence would end, and truth would thunder louder than their laughter ever could. As I stood there, I studied each of them in turn, observing in the way only a mother can. My son, pacing as he spoke to a friend on the phone, boasting about his career, about his connections, about a life he thought he had built entirely on his own. He didn't know how much of that foundation came from me. He didn't know how many nights I stayed awake, praying, working, sacrificing so that he could climb higher. He didn't know, or perhaps he had simply forgotten. My daughter sipping her champagne delicately, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. She looked elegant, polished, draped in clothes I could never have afforded in my youth. She thought herself superior now, a woman above the life I had lived. She had forgotten that once, her dresses were hand-me-downs, stitched and restitched by my tired hands. She had forgotten that I gave her my own winter coat when the cold was too much, that I went without so she could have just a little more. And my son-in-law? Oh, my son-in-law. He stood there like a king on a throne that wasn't his, sipping from a glass he hadn't paid for, sailing on a yacht he didn't own. He looked at me as though I were beneath him, as though the word plumber could erase the years of blood and sweat and tears that had brought us here. He thought he had won with his clever little remark. He thought he had put me in my place. But he didn't understand that I had no need to prove myself with words. My life was proof enough. Still, the sting of his voice lingered. Plumbers have no place here. I repeated it in my mind over and over, like a stone being turned in the palm of my hand. Each repetition smoothed the edges until it no longer cut but strengthened. Yes, I had been a plumber, a fixer, a doer of small things. And wasn't that noble? Wasn't it honorable to build, to repair, to make whole again what was broken? Wasn't it greater to be the one who restored than the one who mocked? They didn't see it, but I did. And I knew. One day, they would too. The yacht rocked gently, and the laughter around me grew faint as they turned their attention back to their drinks, their stories, their endless posing for pictures. They thought the moment had passed, but for me, it had only just begun. Because in my silence, I was planning. Not in schemes or petty revenge, no. My revenge was never loud, never cruel. My revenge was patience. My revenge was truth. My revenge was the quiet knowledge that one day, the masks they wore would fall, and they would see me, not as the woman they mocked, not as the mother they dismissed, not as the plumber fixing taps, but as the foundation of everything they had ever known. So I waited. I smiled faintly, as though their insult had never touched me. I let them believe their laughter had rolled off my back like water. I played the part of the silent mother, blending into the background, just as I always had. But inside I was steadying myself. Because I knew something they didn't. And their laughter, sweet as it seemed in that moment, would not last long. The day had stretched long beneath the heavy sun. The laughter of my family had grown louder, the clinking of glasses more careless, their words freer with every sip of champagne. I remained where I always did, quiet, observant, watchful. I had endured the insult, endured the laughter, endured being made small in their eyes. But the thing about arrogance is this. It does not stop once it has found a victim. It grows bolder, it seeks more ground, it presses and presses until either it consumes everything or it meets something stronger. And that day, my son-in-law grew bolder. He had found his rhythm, as men like him often do when they feel the world is on their side. Every story he told had himself at the center. Every joke was sharpened at my expense. At first, the insults were veiled. Slight remarks about people who work with their hands. Comments about those who never rise above their station. My children chuckled nervously, not daring to challenge him. My daughter, his wife, laughed the loudest. Her pride tangled so tightly with his that she didn't know where hers ended and his began. But then his words sharpened, no longer cloaked in jest. He gestured toward me as I quietly wiped a bit of spilled juice from the table, my instincts too strong to leave a mess unattended. See? Always cleaning, always fixing. You can take the woman out of the workshop, but you can't take the workshop out of the woman. The group laughed again. This time I saw even my son-in-law's friends joining in. Men who barely knew me, who had no history with me, laughing simply because he had set the tone. My face remained calm, but inside I felt the sting of betrayal deeper than ever before. He wasn't finished. Honestly, he continued, raising his glass high as though to toast his own cruelty, plumbers have no place here. A yacht like this is for people of refinement, of success, of real achievement, not for someone who belongs with wrenches and pipes. This time, the laughter didn't come as quickly. My children shifted uneasily in their seats. My son glanced at me, just for a moment, guilt flickering in his eyes. My daughter pressed her lips together, perhaps realizing the words were too harsh, even for her husband's usual arrogance. But still, no one spoke, and so the silence stretched. I stood there, steady as the deck beneath my feet, and I felt the fire rise inside me. A fire born of years of sacrifice, years of silence, years of carrying burdens none of them would ever understand. A fire that had waited patiently, but now demanded release. Slowly, deliberately, I turned to face him. He smirked, certain he had beaten me down, certain that the quiet mother would remain quiet still. But I looked him straight in the eyes, my voice calm, steady, and stronger than it had ever been. "This," I said, each word deliberate, heavy with truth, "is my yacht." For a moment the world stopped. The sea itself seemed to hold its breath. The gulls overhead fell silent. Even the wind stilled, as though waiting for what would come next. Around me, my family froze. Glasses hovered halfway to lips. Smiles collapsed. Laughter died in throats. Their eyes darted to me, then to one another, searching for some sign that they had misheard. But I did not flinch. I did not waver. My gaze stayed locked on his, unwavering as the horizon. The silence was thunderous. And then, like a crack of lightning, the shock spread across their faces. My son's jaw dropped. My daughter's hand slipped from her husband's arm. My daughter-in-law's sunglasses slid down her nose as she leaned forward, eyes wide, as though staring at a stranger she had never known. The grandchildren blinked, confused, sensing the shift but not yet understanding it. And my son-in-law? His smirk faltered. The color drained from his face, though he tried to mask it with a nervous laugh. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice tight, forced. "Surely you don't—" But I cut him off, my tone sharper now, though still steady. "I mean exactly what I said. This yacht does not belong to you. It does not belong to my children. It belongs to me." The silence deepened, heavy and unbreakable. And then, as their eyes searched mine for explanation, I let the past rise within me. I let the memories flood my voice, each word a truth they had never cared to know. I closed my eyes for a moment, and when I opened them, I was no longer standing on the deck of a yacht. I was back in time years earlier in a small kitchen with peeling paint and a flickering light. My husband had just returned home, weary from another long day, his shoulders heavy with the weight of work and responsibility. We had little then, very little, but we had each other. And when he fell ill, when his strong hands could no longer carry the weight they once had, I stood beside him. I worked harder. I carried him even as his body failed. And when he passed, he left me not just memories, but a small inheritance. It was not much, certainly not enough to live the kind of life others flaunt, but it was enough to build something if I was careful, if I was wise. And so I was. I remembered the meetings in offices where men in suits looked at me as though I were lost, as though I had stumbled in from the wrong world. "A yacht?" one of them had asked, barely able to keep the amusement from his voice. "That's not the kind of thing people like you buy." But I had looked him straight in the eyes and said, "It is exactly the kind of thing I will buy." I worked. I sacrificed. I cut corners in my own life, living simply, quietly, saving every penny, every dollar, until the dream became reality. And then, with the inheritance my husband left and the savings I scraped together, I purchased the yacht. Not for vanity, not for show, but as a symbol of everything I had endured, everything I had built, everything I had become. For years, I kept it quiet. I let my children enjoy it, let them believe it was some gift from fate, some stroke of luck. I never corrected them when they bragged to friends, never interrupted when they boasted as though it were theirs. I let them have that illusion because I thought it made them happy. But standing there, on that day, hearing the venom in my son-in-law's voice, I knew the time for silence had ended. I opened my eyes, bringing myself back to the present, my family still frozen around me. "You speak of plumbers as though it is a shameful thing," I said, my voice firm now, resonant. "You speak of hands that fix, hands that mend, Hands that work, as though they are less worthy than hands that only hold glasses of champagne. But those hands, these hands, paid for everything you stand on right now. Every inch of this yacht was bought not by your arrogance, but by my labor, my sacrifice, my silence. No one spoke. Not a breath, not a whisper. I turned my gaze back to my son-in-law, his face pale now, his confidence unraveling. So, the next time you tell me plumbers have no place here, I said, my eyes locked on his, remember this. Without me, without these hands, without this so-called plumber, you would not be here at all. Because this is my yacht. And with those words, the silence was complete. Not the silence of dismissal, not the silence of mockery. This was a silence heavy with truth. A silence that weighed on their chests, pressing down until they could no longer laugh, no longer smile, no longer pretend. It was the silence of revelation. The words hung in the air like thunder that refuses to roll away. This is my yacht. I had spoken them slowly, clearly, each syllable a stone dropped into still water. And the ripples were still spreading when I looked at him. My son-in-law, the man who had mocked me, belittled me, treated me like less than the dirt beneath his shoes. His face changed instantly. Moments earlier, he had been the center of attention, the man with the clever grin and the cruel tongue. But now, that grin was gone. In its place was something he could not hide. Shock, raw and unfiltered. His jaw tightened, his eyes darted nervously. The corners of his mouth pulled tight as though he were grasping for words that would not come. For the first time that day, he had no joke, no smirk, no sneer. Instead, embarrassment spread across his face, hot and uncontrollable. I could see it in the way his ears flushed red, in the way he shifted uncomfortably in his seat, in the way his bravado collapsed like a sandcastle against the tide. He tried to steady himself, to laugh it off, but the sound that escaped his lips was not laughter at all. It was a dry, broken chuckle, strangled and hollow. And then, shame. Shame settled on him heavy and merciless. I saw it in his eyes as they dropped to the floor, no longer daring to meet mine. I saw it in his hands, once animated and grand as he gestured through his stories, now clenched tight in his lap. He could not hide it. Not from me. Not from anyone. The arrogance that had carried him all afternoon was gone. In its place stood a small, humbled man who had been revealed for exactly what he was. And it was not just him. My children, my flesh and blood, the ones who had joined in his laughter, sat in silence now. Their guilt was written plainly across their faces. My daughter avoided my eyes altogether, staring out at the water as if the horizon might save her from the shame she felt. My son shifted in his seat, guilt etched into every movement, his lips pressed tightly together as though he wished he could swallow back every chuckle that had escaped him earlier. Even the grandchildren, too young to understand the full weight of what had been said, sensed the change. They looked around, puzzled, their eyes wide, their playfulness gone. They felt the heaviness in the air, though they did not yet have the words to name it. It was a strange kind of silence that fell over us. Not empty, but full of unspoken apologies, full of regret, full of the realization that in their eagerness to laugh at me, they had revealed more about themselves than they ever intended. And for the first time in a long time, respect returned to me. But it came too late. I felt it in the way their eyes lingered on me differently now. Not dismissive, not patronizing, but watchful, cautious, almost reverent. I felt it in the way my son-in-law's shoulders hunched, no longer squared in confidence, but curled inward in defeat. I felt it in the way no one dared speak, as though words themselves were unworthy in the presence of the truth I had laid bare. Respect, yes, it was there, but respect born not from love, not from loyalty, but from the sharp sting of humiliation. And I thought to myself, How sad it is that sometimes respect only comes after dignity is defended, not before. How sad it is that silence is mistaken for weakness, patience mistaken for ignorance, humility mistaken for worthlessness, until one moment proves them all wrong. I let the silence stretch. Let them sit in it. Let them feel the weight of their own shame. My son-in-law shifted again, his face pale now, his lips trembling as though he wanted to speak but could not find the words. Perhaps he wanted to apologize. Perhaps he wanted to explain, to excuse his behavior, to soften the sting of his cruelty. But he said nothing. And I did not offer him an escape. For too long I had been the quiet one, the background figure, the dependable presence that no one noticed until something was broken or missing. For too long I had let my own sacrifices remain unseen, my own worth unspoken, believing that love alone would keep their respect alive. But that day had shown me otherwise. So I let him sit in his regret. I turned my eyes away from him, away from the shameful slump of his shoulders, and I looked out at the horizon instead. The sea stretched endlessly before me, strong, unyielding, timeless. And in that vastness, I saw myself, not weak, not small, but enduring. I remembered the years of raising children alone after my husband passed, the endless nights of work, the meals skipped so they would have enough, the clothes mended so theirs could be new. I remembered the sacrifices, the exhaustion, the loneliness, and I remembered how none of them ever truly asked what it had cost me. They had only ever taken, only ever assumed, and yet I had given, always given. Now, standing there on my own yacht, I realized something I should have known long ago. Dignity is not given by others. It cannot be handed over in words of praise or recognition. Dignity is claimed, protected, held tight within oneself, no matter who tries to strip it away. My son-in-law's shame was not my victory. My family's guilt was not my revenge. The victory was this moment, this undeniable truth that I had not been less than them, not for a single second, that I had always been the backbone, the foundation, the quiet strength that allowed them to sit there at all. They knew it now, and they could never unknow it. As the yacht rocked gently beneath us, I could almost feel the shift in power. The balance had tipped. No longer was I the silent mother in the corner, invisible and overlooked. I was the center now. I was the one they turned to with wide eyes and tight throats. I was the one who held the weight of the truth, the owner not just of the yacht beneath us, but of the respect that silence had denied me for so long. But even as I stood in that power, a part of me ached for the years of being unseen, for the years of giving without acknowledgement, for the years of loving without respect. Ached because I knew that this shift had come too late. Respect given too late is not respect at all. It is regret. And regret cannot erase the sting of the words that had been spoken, the laughter that had rung in my ears. It cannot erase the image of my own children laughing alongside the man who mocked me. It cannot erase the truth that, for them, my worth had only become visible when it was tied to wealth, to ownership, to power. That realization cut deeper than any insult ever could. I looked at my son-in-law one last time, his head bowed, his pride shattered, and I felt no joy in his regret. Only clarity. Clarity that I would never again allow myself to be silenced, never again allow my dignity to be questioned, never again allow their laughter to diminish me. I turned my face back to the sea, letting the wind brush against my skin, and I breathed deeply. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Because in that moment, I understood the truth. Patience is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. And dignity, once claimed, cannot be taken away. And though their respect had come too late, my self-worth had always been there, waiting quietly, steady as the tide, ready to rise. That day, As the sun dipped lower and the laughter that once mocked me faded into silence, I understood something I will never forget. Silence is powerful. It teaches patience, it gathers strength, it holds steady when the storm rages loudest. But truth spoken at the right moment, is unstoppable. For years, my family thought my silence meant weakness. They mistook humility for insignificance. They mistook love for servitude. And my son-in-law, in his arrogance, believed he could tear me down with a single cruel remark. But he was wrong, because a mother, especially one who has sacrificed, endured, and given everything, is never to be underestimated. I do not take pride in their shame, nor in their regret. What I carry with me from that day is something deeper. The knowledge that dignity does not come from wealth, nor from the approval of others. Dignity comes from within, from knowing your worth even when others are blind to it. So, let this story be a lesson. Families may falter, respect may wither, but a mother's strength, her patience, and her truth will always rise, stronger than the tide, brighter than the sun.